This is a completely flat map, and I'm going to spend 100 days here developing my own farm. Our goal is to make it as profitable as possible. Today, we'll start by creating our first field and growing rice sprouts in greenhouses. If you're interested, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Waking up in the morning, I saw that the weather was quite nice, though a light rain was expected later. Today marked the 37th day of our survival on the flat map, and I planned to create our first field. In the afternoon, I intended to plant canola, as its price was relatively high compared to other crops. I already had a rough idea of where to place the field. I initially thought about creating it where our hayfield used to be, so I got into the tractor and headed to the store to buy soil cultivation equipment, as we didn't have any yet. In general, we lacked proper machinery for field work, but I hoped to acquire more over time. Arriving at the store, I started browsing for the right equipment. A small subsoiler caught my eye. It was reasonably priced and a perfect fit for our small tractor. The choice was obvious, so I bought it. It cost us just over $1,000. After attaching it to the tractor, I headed back to the farm. Once I arrived, I took another look at the area and realized that it would be more convenient to place the field closer to the farm. Switching to construction mode, I began marking the boundaries of the future field. I decided to make it long and narrow, so that the equipment would spend less time turning during sowing and harvesting. With the layout set, I got into the tractor and started plowing the land. I tried to keep the field as even as possible. It would be much easier and more enjoyable to work on that way. Once the main area was plowed, I worked on smoothing out the edges to give it a neat appearance. When I finished, I stepped back to admire the result. It was a fairly large and well-shaped field. The next step was building a road around it to make it easier for machinery to move around. I laid out a road along almost the entire boundary, ensuring convenient access from any side. Additionally, to enhance the farm's appearance, I planted some trees, which made it look much nicer. By this time, the rain had started, so I decided to postpone sowing until tomorrow. For today, it was time to take a well-earned rest. Waking up in the morning, I already knew for sure that today we would be planting canola on our field. But for that, we needed the right equipment, so I immediately got into the tractor and headed toward the store. Upon arrival, I began reviewing the available seeders that fit our budget. We had 4 options to choose from, but I decided to buy the cheapest one. Right now, saving money was crucial since we still had expenses ahead for herbicides and fertilizers, which wouldn't be cheap. In addition to the seeder, I also needed to buy seeds. Once I had everything necessary, I attached the seeder to the tractor and filled it with seeds. With that done, it was time to return to the farm. Arriving at the field, I immediately started planting canola. Even though the seeder wasn't very large, the work didn't take too long, which was a pleasant surprise. Now, all that was left was to wait for the seeds to sprout. With nothing else to do in the meantime, I returned home, parked the seeder and tractor in their places, and went to rest. The next day, the first thing I did was rush to check on our field. There, I saw that the canola had already sprouted, but along with it, a lot of weeds had also appeared, which needed to be removed immediately. To deal with them, I needed a weeder, so I headed to the store to buy one. After selecting a model that was best suited for our tractor, I made the purchase and drove back to the field to begin weeding. The work was progressing quite quickly, and most of the weeds disappeared under the weeder's blades. However, during the process, I noticed a section in the middle of the field where the canola hadn't sprouted at all. That was a bit disappointing, but I hoped it wouldn't significantly impact the overall yield. After finishing the weeding, I saw that some weeds still remained on the field, ones that the weeder couldn't remove. To get rid of them, I needed to use herbicides, so I headed to the store to buy a sprayer. Upon arriving, I checked the available models. The only one that fit within our budget cost $6,000. I had no choice but to buy it, since all the other options were far too expensive. I also purchased herbicides to treat the field. After filling the sprayer with herbicides, I ran into an unexpected problem. The tractor's front wheels lifted off the ground as soon as the sprayer was attached. I wasn't sure what to do since we didn't have the money for a more powerful tractor or a different sprayer. Then I decided to try filling the tank only partially, just 300 liters. This worked. The tractor remained stable and I was able to head to the field. However, when I reached the farm's gate, I encountered yet another issue. The sprayer was too wide to fit through the entrance. At that moment, I regretted choosing this model, but there was no point in getting frustrated. Instead, I decided to build a direct road leading straight to our field to avoid passing through the farmyard. Once the road was completed, I was finally able to reach the field with ease. When I unfolded the sprayer and started the treatment, I felt relieved. It had been quite a hassle getting to this point. The sprayer worked perfectly. The herbicides successfully eliminated even the weeds that the weeder couldn't remove. That was a huge relief. Thanks to its wide coverage, I managed to treat the entire field in just 2 passes. However, just before finishing, the herbicide ran out, forcing me to make another trip to the store for more. Once the field was completely cleared of weeds, it was time to apply fertilizers. I went back to the store, bought fertilizers, and refilled the sprayer. Then I returned to the field and evenly spread the fertilizer across the entire area. Now our field was fully weed-free and fertilized, which should significantly boost our canola yield. Back at the farm, I realized that the sprayer still wouldn't fit inside the yard, so I decided to leave it temporarily at the entrance after preparing a designated spot for it. Now, all that was left was to wait for the harvest to ripen. In the meantime, I could finally take a well-earned break. Our canola had been growing for 7 months, and by July it was fully ripe. That meant it was finally time to begin harvesting. However, I needed the right equipment, so I headed to the store. There, I found a small harvester attachment that could be connected to a tractor. It wasn't too expensive, so I decided to buy it since we didn't have enough money for a full-sized combine yet. I just hoped that our tractor would be powerful enough to pull it. Arriving at the field, I started harvesting and was pleasantly surprised. The machine collected canola efficiently, and the tractor wasn't even operating at full capacity. However, I soon noticed an issue. The unloading auger of the harvester was quite low, meaning it probably wouldn't be able to reach the trailer. While the grain tank was filling up, I had some time to think about how to solve this problem. I decided to prepare a small storage area where I could unload the harvested canola and later transfer it to the trailer using the auger conveyor we had previously bought for silage. Switching to construction mode, I set up a compact storage area for temporary grain storage. It looked just right for the amount of harvest our field would produce. Once that was done, I got back into the tractor and started unloading the harvester's grain tank. After emptying the tank, I resumed harvesting, periodically unloading canola onto the prepared storage area. Once the entire field had been harvested, I was left with a sizable pile of canola. Now, I needed to load it into the trailer. I drove back to the farm to park the harvester and pick up the necessary loading equipment. However, as I approached the gate, I realized that the harvester couldn't fit through. I had no choice but to remove a small section of the fence to allow larger machinery to enter the farm freely in the future. Now I could also finally move the sprayer inside the farmyard. With that done, I hooked up the auger conveyor and headed back to the field. After positioning the trailer, I began loading the canola. Bit by bit, the trailer filled up, and by the end, it was almost completely loaded. However, I decided not to sell the harvest just yet, as the price of canola was too low. So, I parked the trailer under the shelter, stored the auger in its place, and began waiting for the price to rise to a more profitable level. On the 50th day of our survival, the price of canola was quite high, so it was finally time to head to the selling point. After selling our entire harvest, we earned nearly $13,500, a pretty solid profit. With the money, I decided to build a few greenhouses to generate a small but steady income each month. To fully automate the watering process, I also purchased water tanks with an automatic supply system. Each tank cost $5,000, but this investment meant I wouldn't have to worry about irrigation anymore. After finishing the construction, we now had a place to grow rice seedlings, which could later be sold at the store for a good price. Additionally, I decided to plant canola on our field again, but before that, the soil needed cultivation, so I headed to the store and purchased a small cultivator. Back at the farm, I got to work on preparing the soil. Since you've already seen the planting process before, I won't go into too much detail. I'll just skip ahead to when the field was fully seeded and fertilized. And there we have it. Our canola is growing once again. This time, I decided to spray the field with herbicides in advance before the first sprouts appeared, to prevent weeds from interfering with crop development. Now, all that's left is to wait for the harvest to ripen. With that, today's work is done, and it's time to rest. 7 months passed, and our canola had grown once again. It was time to start harvesting. I followed the same process as before, and soon completed the harvest. Then, I loaded the canola into the trailer and set off to sell it. However, this time, the yield was lower, and the price wasn't as high as before. In the end, I received just under $9,000. Despite this, the money was still useful, as I needed to buy a trailer for transporting pallets of rice seedlings produced in our greenhouses. Over time, a significant number of pallets had accumulated, so I purchased a small auto-loading trailer to simplify and speed up the transportation process. On my way back from the store to the farm, I also picked up several barrels of fertilizer, herbicides, seeds, and a diesel barrel that had been left near the store. However, some barrels remained, and I planned to pick them up on my next trip. For now, I unloaded the materials I had brought back and set off to sell the pallets of seedlings. By the evening, I had transported all the pallets, increasing our balance to $14,500. This was an excellent result, as our greenhouses had fully paid for themselves, and we had barely invested any additional funds into them. The only task left was to transport the remaining barrels still at the store. I delivered them to the farm and carefully placed them under the shelter. After that, I headed to our greenhouses to build a few more, as I realized that this was a fairly profitable venture that required minimal effort. Once the construction of a new greenhouse was complete, I thought it would be a good idea to refill our silage pit so it wouldn't sit idle and could continue generating profit. So I attached the mower to the tractor and headed to the hayfield to harvest a fresh batch of grass for silage production. After mowing a large section of grass, I immediately loaded it into the silage pit, carefully compacted it, and covered it with plastic. With that done, I went to rest while waiting for the silage to ferment. 2 hours later, the fermentation process was complete, and we had 132,000 liters of silage, a truly impressive amount. During the same time, the greenhouses had also produced a significant number of pallets with rice seedlings. Since we had a lot of work to do today, there was no time to waste. I immediately started transporting the pallets for sale. By the time I was done, I had earned just over $6,000. $8,000. Now it was time to start selling the silage. I spent the entire day loading and transporting it to the selling point. By the evening, our silage pit was completely empty, and our balance had grown to just over $608,000, the largest amount we had ever earned so far. The remaining forage that didn't fit into the silage pit was collected in the trailer and unloaded back into the pit. Then, I parked all the equipment in its proper place and went to rest after a productive day. On the 57th day, I decided to spend part of our earnings on building another greenhouse and adding some decorative plants around the farm. The total cost for these upgrades was only $8,000, which seemed like a reasonable amount. Additionally, I wanted to try forestry. To do that, I needed to visit the store and purchase a tree planter along with seedlings. After heading to the store, I bought everything necessary. However, when I tried to attach the planter to our tractor, I realized that it was too large and heavy, causing the tractor to tip forward. At that moment, I knew it was time to buy a new, more powerful tractor, as our old one was no longer handling many tasks efficiently. I found a suitable model for $14,000, then upgraded it by adding dual wheels and a cabin for a more comfortable working experience. The modifications increased the total cost to $17,000. This tractor was significantly more powerful than our previous one. Since we no longer needed the old tractor, I decided to sell it. Now I could finally get behind the wheel of our new tractor and attach the planter. It handled the weight with ease, so I headed back to the farm. However, as I approached the farm's gate, I noticed that the tractor barely fit through. In the future, I would need to address this and create a proper entrance for larger equipment. Now, I could start preparing for tree planting. First, I selected a location. I decided that the best option would be the area behind our equipment sheds. Once I had chosen the spot, I built a road and marked the planting locations. Then, I fenced off the area and decorated it with plants. Now, everything was set, and I got to work. Planting the trees didn't take too long, but partway through, I realized that I didn't have enough seedlings, so I had to make another trip to the store to buy an additional batch. Once everything was planted, I sold the planter since we wouldn't need it anymore, and it was quite expensive. After that, I returned to the farm and started thinking about creating another field. However, when I attached our old subsoiler to the new tractor, it looked ridiculously small. It was clearly not suited for this machine, so I decided to sell it and buy something larger. At the store, I chose a new subsoiler for $7,500. It was a perfect match for our tractor, which made me very happy. After purchasing it, I attached it to the tractor and headed back to the farm. Once there, I switched to construction mode and began marking the boundaries of the new field. After that, I started plowing the land. By the end of the day, the new field was fully completed. I think today was incredibly productive. We created another field, planted several batches of tree seedlings, and bought a new, more powerful tractor. So, that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time.